article about a fine tradition. The tradition of scientific glass blowing. I didn't know there were even people trained to do it. It makes sense to me when I think back to my organic chemistry days, because I started out as a chemistry major and we had the most amazingly complicated pieces of glassware that we had to use. I remember breaking one time in my senior year when I was doing an independent study and having to drive to this nondescript building somewhere in Detroit, I couldn't even tell you where, and getting buzzed through multiple locked doors to acquire a new piece of glassware with all of the intricate distillery kinds of tools inside. But it never occurred to me that there was such a skill as scientific glass blowing. And the people who are trained in it, who actually do it, have to apprentice, because not only do they need to understand glass blowing, they need to understand the scientific principles for which they're blowing the glass. So it is very much a specialty tradition. You can't learn about it from books. It's like welding or plumbing. There's just a certain amount of it you have to do hands-on. You have to get a feel for the medium you're working in. Excuse me, something up here. And you have to understand when things are just right and when they will accomplish the catching of nanoparticles or the right chemical distillery or counting ticks at the appropriate place in the funnel that you've put them in. Most of our educational glass blowers are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and most of the universities have gotten rid of the positions. So what we've begun to realize is that we have a shortage of glass blowers, scientific glass blowers. So why do I tell you this? Because we've started a new apprentice program at Salem Community College in Massachusetts, of all places. They've always had a program, but they've had very few students. This year they'll have 60 students, they'll have 60 apprentices, and they're hoping to get them out in time to learn from the masters. So, if you're looking for a second career, you want to do scientific glass blowing, all you have to do is go to Salem, Massachusetts.
It's a lovely place.
It is. I was surprised. I was delighted when I visited it a few years ago, just on a whim, because we were in Boston poking around. And it is it's a beautiful little community. Who knew? I wasn't sure how I was going to explain apprenticing to you, and then there was that article at 11 o'clock last night. We'll call it a God wink. I'm not sure that's what it was, but now you know something you didn't know before. But you know, that's what we do. That's what we do in life. We've learned through apprenticeships. We learn how to cook. We learn how to clean. We learn how to shovel snow. We learn how to garden. We learn how to fix things. We learn how to decorate. We learn how to make flower arrangements. We learn how to play the piano. We learn how to read a book from someone who taught us how to do that. So in essence, truly, an apprenticeship. You learn from someone who mastered the skill. And if we were lucky, whatever we learned to master is what became a passion for us, something that we really like to do. And if we were really, really lucky, we got to do it as our job. And so, as Wayne read, Elisha was out plowing in his father's field, farming, when Elijah came along and said, Elisha, have you ever thought about studying the Torah? And of course, that's our modern term. I'm not sure that's the term that Elijah used, but in essence, he asked Elisha, have you ever thought about studying the documents of the church, the laws of the church? And Elisha said, well, Elijah said, I knew I was going to keep these names straight. Elijah. Elisha said, no, I'm not smart enough to do that kind of work. To which Elijah asked, how did you learn how to farm? He said, well, God made me smart enough to learn how to farm. He said, well, then God made you smart enough to learn about the laws of the Jewish tradition. You just need someone to teach you, and convinces Elisha to come along. And so the two of them begin to travel together, Elisha learning from Elijah. And they come to a place where other prophets tell Elisha, Elijah is going to be taken from you. It is time for Elijah's homegoing, so to speak. And so Elijah says to Elisha, I'm going to go without you to Bethel. And Elisha says, no, you won't. I'm not taking my eyes off of you. And so as they continue to walk, Elijah asks Elisha, well, why are you so intent on this? And Elisha says, I know that this is your homegoing. I know that you are going to be taken away. So what is it you want? I want to have 2/3 of your abilities as a prophet. And Elijah thinks about it and says, okay, and they continue on, and along the route, other prophets continue to remind Elisha that Elijah's going to leave, and finally Elijah says to Elisha, keep an eye on me very closely then. You wanted to come along, you wanted to watch, now watch very closely. And when I am taken, if you are paying attention, then maybe you'll get what you're looking for. And so as they are walking, as the story goes, the chariot arrives and Elijah is whisked away in the great smoke and fire of the horses and carriage. I've read several versions of the story, and I can't really give you a better answer than that because that's how everybody has translated that particular activity. But what Elisha does next is rent his clothing in the Jewish tradition. Someone has gone home to God, tear your clothing. That is in the Jewish tradition. But then realizes, as he's trying to be observant, as Elijah told him, that Elisha spots Elijah's mantle or cloak or shoulder covering, whatever you want to call it, that designates him as a prophet. Elisha picks that up. And en route he had seen Elijah part the waters so they could walk across the sand of a river as opposed to try to ford the stream. And as he comes back to the river, he decides to do the same thing to see if the power is retained in the mantle. And it is. He can part the water, he can walk through the river, and then from that day forward, he wears Elijah's mantle. He wears the symbol of his prophecy, and he continues to do the healing and the speaking and the teaching that Elijah would have done, only even more successfully, because he paid such close attention as he was instructed by his instructor. You see, that apprentice had learned and carried on the important work of that prophet. Gesundheit. In our second reading today, we're continuing our working through Galatians. Remember, Paul started a conversation with the Galatians. He loved them a little bit, and then he started giving them a hard time about what they weren't doing. And he reminded them, you know, I persecuted the Christians. I used to be a lawman, and now I am a God-man. Following the teachings of God. He reminds them that Jesus' teachings are teachings of inclusion, teachings of love, and that is what they are supposed to be doing. And he reminds them that Jesus ate with the rich, Jesus ate with the poor, Jesus taught the experts, he learned from the experts, that Jesus taught the masses, that he included all genders and all colors. He reminds them that they are instructed to include everyone. Now let's hear how Paul interprets that. Christ has set us free to live a free life. So take your stand and never again let anyone put a harness of slavery on you. It is absolutely clear that God has called you to a free life. Just make sure that you don't use this freedom as an excuse to do whatever you want to do and destroy your freedom. Rather, use your freedom to serve one another in love. That's how freedom grows. For everything we know about God's Word is summed up in a single sentence: love others as you love yourself. That's the act of true freedom. If you bite and ravage each other, watch out. In no time at all, you will be annihilating each other. And where will your precious freedom be then? My counsel is this: live freely, animated and motivated by God's spirits, and then you won't feed the compulsion of selfishness. For there is a root of sinful self-interest in us that is at odds with the free spirit, just as the free spirit is incompatible with selfishness. These two ways of life are antithetical, so you cannot live at times one way and at times another way, according to how you feel on any given day. Why don't you choose to be led by the Spirit, and so escape the erratic compulsions of a law-dominated existence? It is obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. Repetitive, loveless, stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage, frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness, trinket gods, magic show religion, paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, an impotent lover to be loved, divided homes and divided lives, small-minded and lopsided pursuits, the vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival, uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, ugly parodies of community. I could go on. But this isn't the first time I've warned you. If you use your freedom this way, you will not inherit God's kingdom. Subtitle made me stop and think a little bit about what's going on in our world today. But what happens when we live God's way? He brings gifts into our lives much the same way that the fruit appears in the orchard. She likes things like affection for others, exuberance about life, and serenity. We develop a willingness to stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people, and we find ourselves involved in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and direct our energies wisely. Legalism is helpless in bringing this about. It only gets in the way. And among those who belong to Christ, everything connected with getting our way and mindlessly responding to what everyone else calls necessities is killed off for good, crucified. Since this is the kind of life we have chosen, the life of the Spirit, let us make sure that we do not just hold it as an idea in our heads or a sentiment in our hearts, but work out its implications in every detail of our lives. That means we will not compare ourselves with each other as if one of us were better and another worse. We have far more interesting things to do with us. Each of us is a divinely inspired original. Nobody preaches it like the Apostle Paul. Nobody. Never again let anybody put on a harness of slavery. Take off your mantle of slavery and replace it with a mantle of freedom, a mantle of passion, a mantle of living. But there are limits to freedom. There are limits to the actions you can take, because some will destroy your freedom. This is not the first time I have warned you. If you use your freedom this way, you will not inherit God's kingdom. Preach it, Paul. Remind us about the fact that all are created as unique gifts to creation. None are to be held in servitude. We have far more interesting things to do with our lives than compare ourselves to others or to pass laws that inhibit the abilities of others to live their lives. We have more interesting things to do than argue about the obvious things like the best ways to privatize our schools or prisons rather than the best way to teach our children and to repair our prisoners. We have more interesting things to do than listen to the rhetoric of despair and violence spewed skewed by the media rather than the celebration of care and kindness shown every day. We have more interesting things to do than listen to people who want to encourage us to believe that the American way of living has outlived its usefulness. We have more interesting work to do. We have people to reach out to each day in kindness and love. We have people to feed. We have people to build houses for. We have people to clothe. We have people to care for. All people, not just some people. That is why Elijah wore the mantle of the prophet and passed it on to Elisha. That is why Paul dropped the scales from his eyes and stopped persecuting Christians. That's why I stand before you in a stole to remind myself and to remind you that we are yoked to a greater God who would have us love all people. That is why you were baptized, to rise again into the work that Christ has trained you for. Remember, with freedom comes responsibility to use it wisely. Ask for strength and courage to continue to be the blessings that you already are. This is your Sunday morning respite. As you all come in from the missionary work that you've been doing all week to be together, to regenerate your spirits and to try on your mantles again. You are yoked to God. You are yoked in an apprenticeship that continues. Go forth and do good work of teaching and being taught. Every day is a God-given learning opportunity. Amen.
Amen.